Hey everybody, you are welcome into this conversation today about finances and the soul. I'm Tim Austin, your host and creator of this podcast, and today I think is a milestone day, being episode number 30. So thanks to all you regular listeners out there for staying tuned in, and to those who have recently discovered us, I hope you find our content both thought-provoking and encouraging. What's your relationship with money and how is it impacting your soul? Our relationship with money certainly affects our relationships both horizontally with others and vertically with God. But it goes even beyond that. It impacts our own souls. My guests for this episode are Amy Young, founder of Global Trellis, Lori Ferrell, a spiritual director, and Daniel Whitt, a missionary currently transitioning into the profession of personal financial planning. After listening, you may want to head over to the show notes to read their bios and learn more about how you can connect with each of my guests today. So let's engage in a conversation about finances and the soul. You guys, I am going to be honest here. I'm not sure today how I'm coming to this conversation because of the state of my soul, maybe. Because I decided to get an early start on taxes. So I decided to get an early start. So I'm, a little bit preoccupied with some of that, how that goes. We're trying to do a refi on our home. So that's another area. I know that at times my soul is disturbed or squelched or somehow distraught in these times. And so, I'm trying to relate it back to finances, of course, because we're going to talk about finances and the soul. And I can recall many times over our 20 years of living and working overseas, finances keeping me up at night. We're going to talk about some of this and the relationship between finances and the soul. And of course, on top of all that, there's the global pandemic, right? Which is impacting a lot of our listeners. So we have a lot to talk about today. Finances and the soul. Have we bitten off more than we can chew here? Are we raising more questions than answers? But I want to as we dive into this conversation, I just want to hopefully encourage our listeners from something that King David said in Psalm 43, verse 5. He said, "Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him." There's always hope. And I love how King David speaks into this situation he's in his place of being downcast and distraught, and says, "Put your hope in God, I will yet praise him." So that should be an encouragement to all of us today, that there's always hope and encouragement as we follow the Lord into these sometimes deep waters of concern over finances and just the state of our soul. So you guys, why are we connecting these two areas? Let's just kind of talk about this. One feels, in terms of finances, deeply worldly, and the other spiritual, right? So why are we connecting them, Daniel?
Yeah. I think it was Martin Luther himself who said there's kind of three necessary conversations: the conversation of the heart, the mind, and the purse. So I think there's just commending you, Tim, for just really being willing to go there in this conversation and how finances engage the soul. And Jesus did talk a lot about money, and not to dive so deep into that, but there's a clarity there that finances are linked to our emotions and our soul. In Matthew 6, where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. And I think Jesus is making it clear that there's a soul connection there. And so, it's exciting, a little scary, but exciting to dive into that. And I think some of that maybe concern is maybe with the warnings that come. I think there's an invitation to go there, but there's also a warning that Jesus gives. So, it's clear that Jesus goes there. So I think we're invited to go there as well. And God wants to be in the middle of that relationship, and our relationship with money. He wants to be right in the middle of it, informing it. shining light into it. And I really think that's why Jesus talked about it a lot, is because he wanted to bring light into that place. And though in a lot of, whether it's the parables or his conversations, maybe money itself isn't the actual focus. It's maybe a larger teaching. It's the coming of the kingdom. It's salvation. It's clear something that he knows is a point of the soul to engage, and really using that space to engage communities. And so, yeah, in terms of kind of the why, it's just a conversation worth diving into, because Jesus goes there and is inviting us to go there as well.
I love that, Daniel. Like it's more of, it's not something we should shy away from, but be invited into by the Lord in this conversation today. As you've alluded to, Daniel, the Bible does have a lot to say about these two areas of our lives, and the interplay and the connection between finances and the soul. And of course, we know that the Bible's teaching is not just for cross-cultural workers, it's for all of his followers. But why do global workers, those of us who are involved in support raising for faith ventures, and living off the generosity of our partners' support, why do we have such an interesting or unique relationship with finances and the soul?
I'll add kind of a little bit into that. I think we have a unique experience as cross-cultural workers, in that a unique view of the reality of where our wealth, or who our wealth belongs to. We're kind of less tied to this false perception that we earn our money and therefore it is ours, as maybe support raisers. And so I think maybe because of that, it's easier to feel a little heavier burden to steward it well, because there's maybe less of that false perception that, I put in my 40 hours and now I get my paycheck. It's no, I put my trust and dependency and God's Spirit working in the hearts of others. And so I think maybe with that, there comes a little bit of a burden to steward that well, because of less of just that tie that it's related to our own efforts and earning.
What about some of the insecurity global workers can feel? I know personally that there were times where I felt very insecure around my finances, feeling like I did not have any control, or I couldn't control the outcome. And some of this could be around savings, emergency savings, retirement, or just some of the choices that we could make. For example, let me just talk candidly about vacation for your family, and how I remember there were times when we really felt a need to step back and get out of the situation we were in so that we could breathe and rest and renew as a family. And there's times when you're just not sure, is this a wise use of and good stewardship of finances, asking for permission to use some of our support finances for vacation and travel and things that are good for the soul. So we're talking about the soul here. So does anybody want to speak to that?
Well, yes, I do think there's conflict when we see our support raising as, but you hear it often, people saying, well, I don't want to post a picture of us having fun on a vacation, because then they'll wonder why we're on vacation instead of doing our ministry. And as an advocate for soul care and taking care of ourselves, I offered a retreat last year, and one of the women came to me and was like, I can't afford it. I don't have enough support to pay for this retreat, but I really want it. And I was all for finding ways to help her have it. And I did go and ask for some funds to scholarship her. And one of the responses I got was, we can scholarship her, but we want to encourage you to be a voice for soul care being something people raise support for.
Mm.
And that was one of those moments where I realized, that is a part of me advocating not just for soul care, but actually advocating that you be a voice to support, like when you raise support, to say and not apologize that you're raising money to support things that help you be well, and even to educate people. This is helping us stay on the field.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not just about ministry till we burn out and die. Like we are inviting you to see us as holistic people. So I think that is something we have to advocate both for ourselves and to our people we support, raise, but we have to help educate them. And maybe that word educate sounds condescending, but, just help them understand this is a way of being for us staying long-term.
I almost hear you saying have a category in the budget for soul care type of things that require finances to do, such as a soul care retreat or counseling or coaching or a family getaway, different things like that. So being an advocate. So what does that look like?
I think being an advocate, as I'm listening to all of this, it's holding a broader perspective than just the current reality. And I think helping people to see the bigger picture, and leaning into those points of tension. Earlier, Tim, when you asked questions of like, why is this conversation maybe difficult to have? And the thought that came to my mind right away is because of the mixed messages we get. Mm-hmm. Before I went to the field, someone that was held up or regarded a historical figure never mentioned support, raising or financial needs in communication with supporters. That person only prayed about them. And I don't mean to say like only prayed. Of course we pray about our financial needs, but then it's confusing. How do we have conversations if that is what is held up as a more spiritual person, is mm-hmm. someone who prays and trusts God and then only celebrates like the miraculous working out instead of, I wrote a support letter. I cast a vision, Lori, as Lori was saying, I cast a vision for people to invest in soul care, and they did. That doesn't seem like a very exciting story as someone showed up at my door with whatever. And so I think part of being an advocate is having space for all of it, for the miracles, for the things that we don't publicly share, but also knowing when do I share something and knowing there isn't just one cookie cutter answer. This is what it looks like to be a person of faith and to be a person of financial maturity, to realize there's a lot of different paths and even seasons within our own story where the Lord might ask you to do something different than he's asked you in a different season. Those are the thoughts that come to me when I think of advocacy.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah. Finances, of course, we're talking about one of the biggest areas of cross-cultural life that can keep global workers up at night and cause a lot of confusion. And like you said, Amy, mixed messages. Why is that? Let's talk a little bit more. Why is that? And what can we do about it from a healthy, be kind to your soul perspective? Because there's a lot in some of those messages, they don't sound like they're really advocating for the soul or being kind to the soul of the global worker. So what are some ways we can turn that around into a healthy conversation of be kind to your soul perspective?
The thought that comes to mind for me is really a lot of this is coming back to identity and who I am in Christ. I know for myself, sometimes where my struggle with money has been, and I hate to say this out loud. That's why I'm stuttering and hesitating. It's been a place of security. If I have enough money, I feel more secure. And even then, my definition of what is enough. I've also known cross-cultural workers who their attitude is, look, I raised this money, so my organization doesn't have the right to tell me. And I think that's also getting into some identity stuff of whose money is it? Whose gift is this? And are we seeing our money as a place of provision and security, or a place of still provision, but then provision of generosity towards us and ways that we can be generous as well. So I'm just thinking, how do I do this in a healthy way? Is I, first of all, have to just get very honest with myself about my identity in Christ and keep coming back to that. And when I veer off a little bit, because we're all going to veer off, but just coming back to, oh, wait, I'm thinking about money maybe in ways that aren't the healthiest, which is a little sign to me. I need to do some exploration here with my spiritual director or with a counselor or just with myself and God. So that's not a tidy answer, but again, I don't think this is a tidy topic.
No, yeah, you're right. It's not a very tidy topic. So there's a lot of different, when we talk about organizations, sending agencies, those who are on our team, just the circle of people around us and groups around us, whether that be churches, our companies, our colleagues on the field, our team. There's so many different ideas and philosophies and approaches to support raising. Like you said, Amy, there's the, don't talk about finances at all. Just share the vision, and by faith, the finances will come in. And there's the other side of communicate clearly what you need, and invite them into that in terms of finances. And then there's maybe a little more something in between there. But how do we open up that healthy conversation and allow for some of these differences of opinion and approaches, but have the conversation stay healthy and positive and moving forward, and leading to a place where, as global workers, we're getting what we need from a soul care perspective. These are all big questions, big challenging questions. Daniel, you want to comment on any of this?
Yeah, I would love to. I think what I'd love to share with our listeners, I think, at least initially, because past experiences, as I know Amy and Rory, you as well alluded to, can just there can be some baggage that make even engaging the topic of money really challenging for our souls, that keep us up at night. And so I think putting out there an invitation to really engage, and maybe starting with a place of what's my relationship with money. I think something that's really challenged me in that journey and feeling a safety to engage that place is really looking even at the morality of money. Because really, in and of itself, it's paper and metal. And it's really neither, in and of itself, it's neither worldly or spiritual, just like the stone or wood of a casted idol. But when that object becomes the object of our affection or our hope, of our souls, then it can take on that worldly character. But when that same stone or wood is used for the purposes of building a home or constructing a bridge, in the same way, money, when it's used such a way that reflects God's heart, whether it's taking care of ourselves, whether it's caring and serving others, being generous, whether it's honoring our parents or our children through something such as estate planning, it can be incredibly spiritual. And so I feel like that's maybe a safe place for people to begin to engage that conversation. And back to kind of what Amy said of my identity and keeping my identity in check and knowing who am I and really who is God, that can help us start some of that conversation.
So it's really what I hear you saying, Daniel. It's a great place to start is, what is my relationship with money? Getting personal with that, really, whether that's with yourself or if you're married, with your spouse. How do we approach this in terms of our relationship with money? That's good. Lori, how about you? Anything you want to add to this?
I think that I'm just struck by what Daniel was saying, and our whole conversation from the very beginning, just even being proposed to talk about soul and money. And I think that thoughts that are going through my head, we'll see what comes, but the dichotomy of spiritual and not spiritual is one that probably makes our relationship with money a place of wrestling that we're not always comfortable with. And sometimes the church may not help us with answers because we're not supposed to be attached to our money. And yet, as missionaries, you do need the money to stay. I think it helps us if we're able to not categorize spiritual or not spiritual, because everything can be spiritual in the sense that God will talk to us about money. And so sometimes I think when we're seeing that we have all the money we need and we don't have to wrestle with it, it's probably those times that we forget to talk about it because there's security that comes. And it's the times when we don't have enough that it brings up our relationship that Daniel's talking about, our relationship with the money. It comes up in the times when we feel less secure. And I think those are great times it's going to bring a wrestling, right? We're going to have to wonder, does this mean it's time to go home? Does this mean we just need to try harder to support raise? We need to get the letters out. But as a spiritual director, I think my interest would be, it's less about finding the answers and more about the noticing. How am I experiencing God right now? How does this leave me feeling? Like, does this mean God's not approving of us right now? Is there sin in our life? That might be places we go to first. But actually, what if the relationship with the money being fully supported versus money has dropped? What if it has nothing to do with some of those automatic responses we have of, there's nothing you've done wrong, but now you are in a place as a human being, just like the rest of the world. We have times of a lot and we have times of not as much. So how do we sit with that? How do we remember we are human? We are not only spiritual beings, but we are both. So those are some thoughts swirling around.
Lori, that is so on point, because I feel like support raising, as I look back on our 20 years of living and working overseas and the seasons of support raising, it felt like such a roller coaster ride at times of emotional highs and lows. You'd have a good meeting at a church or in a group with supporters. You'd have one that didn't go so well. The finances didn't come through, and if we could do more of what you're talking about, that would seem to level out that emotional roller coaster by grounding us in, well, a lot of these things we're talking about, identity, just taking notice of where we're at and the state of our souls, our who we are. There's so much in that. I love that. I don't know about you guys. Anybody else want to comment on that?
I just want to say, as listening to you talk, Lori, and then your response, Tim, and I can feel Daniel's presence here too. I got tears in my eyes, I think, because these are important conversations that touch on deep things. And I love that we don't have to shy away from them. But there, as Daniel said at the very beginning, there's this invitation. And Lori, as you were saying, to notice what is happening, and that there's just, it's such a freer place to live, of invitation and noticing, and that we can cry out to God when we need finances or needs are not being met. Like, he wants to hear all of that. So noticing what is going on and bringing that to God. So that was just and so I wanted to notice, wait, I have tears in my eyes. Something is going on here. So I just even thought, like, even in the moment, even in this conversation right now, I want to practice what we're talking about. So that's what I noticed. I had tears.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Amy. And I think, going back to what you said, Lori, sometimes it has nothing to do, like you said, with some of the questions we're asking. It can just be, I mean, look at where we're at now with COVID. It's affecting everybody. It's impacting almost everybody in some way or shape or form. And a lot of that is in the area of finances. Does that mean my call is over, or I no longer am called here, or my season of life and ministry is over, or there's going to be a big shift or change? Not necessarily. We're experiencing a lot of the impact of something that is global, and it's affecting so many people and impacting so many people. And that goes back to if my identity and security has been wrapped up in the state of my finances, that's going to feel heavier on me right now.
I think one of the thoughts coming to my mind is the idea of scarcity that can come when there's not enough. And that this impacts our relationship with God as well. These are all ways that it reflects our belief system. And so our beliefs about God come into view when things aren't going the way maybe we expect them to, or we think they should go. And so, when we're doing God's work, we might expect, well, I've been called to this, there should be enough, and people have been behind us and they've given to us. But then what do we do when we find, okay, during COVID, a pandemic, or other crises in the world where maybe finances are impacted and people aren't giving as much? And this impacts everyone, right? This doesn't just impact missionaries, but missionaries feel it when the world feels it. And so then that grappling of scarcity. And I think sometimes what we all see is, and I'm not saying I've never been guilty of this, I definitely feel I am guilty of that scarcity mindset where there's not enough. And so we start to kind of shut down our generosity towards ourselves, towards the way we are living. I see people, not eating well on the field because they don't have enough. So they start to buy cheaper food and not have as much. And so that impacts your physical health. I mean, there's just so many ways where our money actually impacts so much more than we even realize, and our mentality of how we live. And I think it definitely gets down to heart issues. So
Right. I mean, just this whole area of trusting God for our daily and monthly needs. It's a growth journey for all of us in the global worker community. And it just goes with the territory, this area of trust and walking that out. What about, so let's shift a little bit and talk about some of the long-term financial concerns. I'm thinking about areas of savings, like emergency savings and retirement. How do we even give ourselves permission to go there? You mentioned this scarcity mindset when doesn't seem to be enough. But even when there does seem to be enough, how do we give ourselves permission to go there when we are living off the generosity of our financial partners?
Yeah, I would think, some of that, maybe beginning that journey of, okay, who does this belong to? And, shifting from how do I steward my supporters' money well to how do I steward God's resources well? And that's hard. And it's hard because even as I say it, I'm like, my supporters may not see it that way. Or that may catch them a bit by surprise. They may see, kind of this, and we use the terms of they've invested in the kingdom through us. And so they want to, I don't know, we use these terms see a return on that investment. And okay, does that look like, what does that look like? What are their expectations for that? And that's really hard and really hard to know, and having different supporters with different expectations and maybe even just some practically in ways that could be helpful is some of those maybe early conversations for those who are just launching out. those just clear expectations with supporters from the beginning of the importance of this soul care, and you wanting to really have a long-term mentality. In the same way you're going to be proactive in learning the language and learning the local culture. You want to be able to set yourself up, just with your finances to be able to care for your soul, to care for your family members' souls, so that you can minister to the souls of others. And maybe some of that even begins with just those early conversations and having those expectations. I remember my wife and I being so surprised in a meeting with a missions board, and we shared kind of a budget with them that included some of more of these long-term things. And, they really captured that soul care, I think, sensitivity, and they just wanted to be sure we had money set aside for a date night. And that just kind of really gave us a freedom to hear that those who were standing with us and really seeing us as conduits of God's resources, would share that permission with us. And I think that also helped us give a permission to ourselves, and maybe even give some verbiage to help maybe others who maybe don't communicate that as clearly, to have those expectation conversations even.
One thing I think that gets complex for cross-cultural workers is how much of this to make public. And so even as I'm listening to this conversation, I'm thinking all of us are in play, meaning all of us are going to change. The way I think about things now is different than it was 5 years ago. And I hope I keep growing. And in 2 years, I'm thinking differently about things. So no matter where you are, dear listeners, you listen to this, if this is stirring something in you, maybe you don't have to tell anybody. Obviously, if you're married or, family or close friends, but that change can start with you. So maybe you don't have to tell your supporters, I'm going to start investing in retirement, or I'm going to start exploring this. You can just do it. So I think there's freedom to keep growing and keep learning and keep leaning into this, and to know that every country listening to this is going to have a slightly different system. So know your system and know how to work with it. I was also thinking in different eras of cross-cultural workers. Again, we've all heard the stories where they packed their stuff in their coffins because they went to the field to die. That's not the era we live in now. And we do live in an era where agencies aren't providing for retirement the way previous generations did, which is neither good nor bad. It's just a fact. And so I think understanding the era you live in, understanding what are kind of norms, cultural norms of your era or your organization, and taking advantage of them. Instead of sticking your head in the sand and saying, I don't like to think about this. I don't want to, I want someone else to do it for me. To go, okay, well, the person who's going to do it for me or for my marriage or for our family is me, is us. And so I think part of it just comes from being willing to own that and to say, I have some agency here as someone who reflects the image of God. God has granted us with some agency. So that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Good, Amy.
I wonder if sometimes that we have, and this might be speaking from 20 years ago, raising support for the first time and reading some of the books that Amy referred to earlier that give us this idea of living by faith. Versus, I guess the other is not living by faith. But
Lori, I want to jump in right there. I even hate that. Like, that's living by faith, and this isn't. So yes, I applaud you for going right there.
Yes.
I'm diving in.
Yes, do it.
Those voices in our head that we've defined, this is what living by faith looks like, and this is not what living by faith looks like if you talk about your support raising versus just pray about it. And again, I just like to say there's not a right or wrong, and it won't look the same for you as someone else. And so what looks like living by faith for one person isn't going to be what your living by faith has to look like. And so what is the invitation for you? And I also think I'd like to add that it changes each season. And so the young 20-year-old who's not thinking about when they're 65 yet. Fair enough. They don't need to be thinking about how am I going to live at 65? And it's okay if they just raise support for the barest minimum, and they go. But then at some point, probably in their late 20s, especially if marriage, or even if marriage doesn't come along, or 30s, they're going to start to think, you know what, I need money for soul care. I need that vacation. And is that okay that now at whatever age, 30, we'll just say, they decide I need vacation put into my budget. Whereas at 20, I was raising the bare minimum. Now I'm asking for a couple thousand more a year. And I don't, like you said, Amy, you don't have to tell everyone, but people may notice, they may ask, but that's where we have to say, you know what, this is where I am now. Mm-hmm. And then moving to the later in stage, Tim, that you were talking about. Okay, so in our 40s or whatever age comes along, and we've got kids that are aging and starting to get closer to that time where we're aware of college. And yeah, we're going to start to think, okay, is this wrong now that I'm asking for people to give me money that I'm going to save? And if that living by faith has put us in a box where we're not allowed to do that, then I would like to say maybe we need to redefine what living by faith means, and that it's not a one size fits all. It's not one season for all of life. To give ourselves permission to have different seasons, different ways God's speaking to us. And that keeps us in our relationship with God as a flesh, meaning like breathing, changing, ongoing. And we have to continue to come back to God in prayer with this, rather than at 20, whatever God said, it still goes at 50, which can either cause judgment on ourselves when we say, is that living by faith definition hindering us to actually live by faith in a freer, more spacious way?
Is that living by faith definition that I have, is it helping or hindering me actually living by faith? That's a great question to go to create some space and to bring before the Lord, to open up a conversation with a trusted friend or a spouse. Boy, that's a great question to land on there, Lori. Thank you for sharing that. Well, as we wrap up here, guys, I feel like there's always a lot more to dive into, to talk about, and maybe we'll return to this topic down the road. But I want to just wrap up our time by asking, what kind of support is available for those in the global community who want to get more intentional about caring for their own souls while attending to the ongoing need of support raising, communicating with donors, finances, all of these things that we've been talking about today? And as I'm asking that question, I'm thinking about who's in the room with me. And we have, each one of us are in various support roles. So I'm asking that question to you, and maybe just each one of us can give a quick response to that. What kind of support is out there for those wanting to maybe dive in deeper to this, or on a more personal level, on a one-on-one level with somebody? Let's talk about that a little bit. Maybe we'll just start with you, Lori.
Well, I can't offer financial support, but I can offer, and others in the role of spiritual direction. I think that if there are places where this conversation has maybe resonated or caused you to feel uncomfortable and squirm, those are both places where we notice, either I'm resisting or wanting more. I'd like to grow. I'd like to understand my relationship with money and finances, but I'd also like to hear God's voice in this area. So spiritual directors are just people that can come alongside and companion you in that journey, and any topic, including finances, is welcome. So that is one way that a spiritual director can support you in that journey. Great.
Daniel, how about you?
Well, yeah, I think what I would speak to is someone who has kind of transitioned off the cross-cultural field and now entering and pursuing becoming a financial planning professional. Very open to just having those general conversations and being a listening ear. And then hopefully a bit of a lamp unto the feet, if you will, into the areas of the disarray. And some of those resources that have been valuable for me, generally speaking, spirituality of fundraising. And Tim, maybe you can put some links and show notes or whatnot. It's a book by Henry Nouwen that's really powerful, just about support raising. There's a group called Ron Blue Institute that just is a Christian perspective of financial management. And some of these more practical resources may be more appropriate for our American listeners. For those international, I think there's still some principles that could be gleaned. There's a blog called Vagabond Finances, and talks a lot about a blogger and different contributors, just kind of the U.S., particularly for U.S. expats, but again, some translatable principles. And then I'll throw one out that's a little bit of a challenge because maybe the title may not sit well, but for those who are wanting to take a little bit deeper dive, and especially in terms of the long term and even financial investing, there's a book called The Millionaire Expat. And really what that's about is just for different cross-cultural workers, depending on their host countries, how they can continue to invest for the long term in spite of maybe regulatory permissions in a particular host country versus their tax domicile country. And that book just provides some good insights and kind of for those who are interested in taking a bit of a deeper dive.
Good. Thanks, Daniel. And we'll definitely, we can definitely put those links to those resources in the show notes for our listeners. Great. Amy, we'll wrap up with you.
My only thing would say at Global Trellis, these are the kind of conversations we want to have where we're not just, I think the world loves to isolate, like, let's have your finances over here. Let's have culture over here. Let's have your marriage over here. Let's have your soul over here. And God calls us to be integrated whole beings. So these are the kind of conversations we are going to keep having on this podcast and at Global Trellis. So thank you so much, Tim, for facilitating this.
Oh, absolutely. Love being with you guys today. And we will definitely keep these conversations going. We may raise more questions and answers, but I think that all the questions that were raised today or a lot of them, maybe something particular resonated with you as a listener, and you want to take that question into some space to reflect and to just dive deeper in some way. That's really the goal of what we're doing. And so, great to be with you guys today, and we'll sign off.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Thanks.
I've personally enjoyed interacting with Amy, Lori, and Daniel as part of the Global Trellis team. And you can as well by heading over to globaltrellis.com, where you'll find contributions from each one of them. If concern or confusion over finances has been keeping you up at night, I encourage you to stay in that uncomfortable space and take notice. How can you intentionally engage the process toward more understanding, a perspective shift, or whatever is being highlighted for you? And feel free to reach out to me at encompasslifecoaching.com and learn how coaching with me can create space for intentional conversations, which then become catalysts for growth. And if this podcast has been helpful to you in some way, can I encourage you to head over to iTunes and give us a review? Ratings and reviews help expand our audience and reach more listeners. Thanks again for joining me for this episode of Navigate. I've been your host, Tim Austin, and I hope you join me for our next conversation.